All right, everyone, welcome back. Today, we're going deep. A story you probably think you know, Cain and Abel. But trust me, we're going to find some surprises along the way. Genesis chapter 4, sibling rivalry taken to, well, the ultimate extreme, right?
Yeah, it's not just sibling rivalry, is it? I mean, this is the first murder ever.
Heavy stuff right from the start.
And you've got all these huge themes packed into one chapter. Sacrifice, jealousy, punishment.
Oh, and we're going to get into the first city ever built, too.
Yeah.
So, like, civilization itself kind of kicks off right after someone gets murdered.
It's Genesis. Things can get pretty intense.
For sure. So let's set the stage. We've got Cain and Abel. Cain, the older brother, what's his deal?
Farmer. Tiller of the ground, it says.
Okay, so he's working the land, settled life. What about Abel?
Shepherd. Always on the move with his flocks.
So right away, there's this contrast, right?
Absolutely. I mean, even symbolically, you can see it. Cain's tied to the earth. It's kind of stability. Abel's got this sense of, I don't know, searching, maybe?
A bit more of a restless spirit.
Yeah, maybe even spiritually restless.
Okay, so then we get to this really crucial part of the story, the offerings. Both brothers bring gifts to God, but Abel's is the one that God really notices.
Right. Abel brings the firstlings of his flock and the fat thereof, the best stuff. Cain, on the other hand, just brings fruit of the ground.
So what's going on there? Why is one better than the other?
Well, you know, I was reading some commentary from a rabbi, and he had a really interesting interpretation. He said it wasn't necessarily about the things they brought, but the attitude, the heart behind it.
Like, was it given freely?
Exactly.
Oh.
Abel, he gave his very best, firstborn of his flock, the prime cuts. You can almost picture him offering it up with, total devotion.
And Cain. Just kind of phoning it in, maybe.
That's what this rabbi was suggesting. Maybe for Cain, it was just going through the motions, checking a box.
Oh, I see. So it wasn't genuine?
Yeah, maybe he wasn't really putting his heart into it. And of course, Cain, he gets furious. I mean, who wouldn't?
God even steps in and warns him. Sin is lying at the door. What's that all about? Is it like a literal devil tempting him or something deeper?
That's a big question, right? You could take it a few ways. Some scholars see it as this external temptation, like you said, a devil on his shoulder. But others focus on Cain's inner struggle, like the darkness is already there inside him.
That's interesting.
So then it brings up this whole free will versus destiny debate. Do we really have control over our actions, or are we kind of predisposed to mess things up?
Ooh, heady stuff.
Big philosophical questions. It's Genesis.
Yeah, and it all leads to this super dark moment. The first murder. Cain kills Abel. The text is so stark about it.
Brutal. It says he rose up against his brother and slew him. It's almost scarier because it's so simple.
No embellishment, no justification, just boom, done. And what gets me is how Cain tries to deny it. Am I my brother's keeper? He asks God. Like he's trying to shrug off any responsibility.
Yeah, that line is chilling. Trying to wash his hands of it. But it raises this question that honestly we're still grappling with today. What does it mean to be responsible for each other?
Are we just supposed to look out for number one, or do we owe something to other people? Like, where does that play out in your life? I'm curious.
Ooh, that's a tough one.
But a good one, right?
Absolutely. It's a question that philosophers and theologians have been wrestling with for centuries. There's no easy answer, but it makes you think about your actions, your responsibility, not just to your family, but to the wider world.
Yeah, like how far does that responsibility actually go?
Big questions.
Huge. Okay, so Cain's obviously in big trouble now. God lays down the punishment. He'll be a wanderer. The earth won't yield for him. Like, it's rough. But then there's this twist, the mark of Cain.
Yeah, it's not just suffering. There's this mysterious mark. Protects him from being killed, but also sets him apart.
So what is it? Like a brand? A tattoo?
Who knows? Some scholars think it was a visible sign of guilt, so everyone would know what he did. Others think it was more like a warning to other people, don't mess with this guy.
Right, like leave him alone. God's dealt with him.
But you could also see it as a twisted kind of mercy, right? God's punishing him and also preventing anyone else from taking revenge.
So punishment and protection all in one.
A paradox, just like most things in Genesis.
True. So Cain's got this mark. He's going to deal with his crime. But then he goes on and has a family. And he builds a city, the first city ever.
It's almost a glimmer of hope in all this darkness. Even from this messed up lineage, human ingenuity persists.
Progress keeps going.
Yeah.
But then we jump ahead a few generations to this guy Lamech, one of Cain's descendants. And this dude, he's actually boasting about killing someone. He's twisted the story, the punishment. into this excuse for his own violence.
It's like he's using Cain's mark as a badge of honor instead of a mark of shame.
Right. Like he's taking something divinely given and distorting it.
Which gets you thinking, how many times has that happened throughout history?
Are we doing it today? Like, are we twisting narratives to fit our own agenda?
It's a good question. It makes you think about how we interpret stories, whether they're religious, historical, or even just the news.
Make you want to be a little more critical of what you're hearing, right?
Absolutely. We need to be more aware of our own biases and question the stories we're told.
And then, just when things are looking super bleak, we get this glimmer of hope at the end of chapter 4. Adam and Eve have another son, Seth. It's almost like a chance to start over.
Yeah, a new beginning. And I bet for Eve especially, it must have felt like this incredible gift. A chance to heal after losing Abel.
A do-over, but not really, right?
Yeah.
Because the past is always there.
Yeah, the shadow of Cain and Abel is still hanging over everything.
So it's more like picking up the pieces and carrying that weight forward.
Exactly. And through Seth, humanity's story continues. But that's a whole other deep dive for another time.
For sure. So before we wrap up part 1 of our Cain and Abel journey, I'm curious, what's sticking with you so far? What's really resonating? Is it the offerings, the question of free will, or maybe that chilling line, am I my brother's keeper?
It's tough to choose, but for me, it's probably the complexity of Cain's character. He's the victim and the villain all at once. Capable of great love, but also this terrible violence.
He's a mess of contradictions.
Aren't we all? It's a reminder that we all have that duality inside us, the potential for good and evil.
That's so powerful. And it leads us to a question we're going to explore further in part 2.
Yeah.
How do we deal with that duality, and what happens when we make the wrong choices?
Huge questions, and ones that are still relevant today, just as much as they were thousands of years ago. So stay tuned. We've got a lot more to unpack.
That's right. We're just getting started.
Welcome back. We were talking about how even something meant for good, like Cain's mark, can get twisted over time.
Yeah, Lamech, that descendant of Cain, really took it to a whole other level. Like, he was bragging about killing a guy.
It makes you think, if something divinely given can be so misinterpreted, what does that say about us? You know, our human tendency to spin things to fit our own agenda.
It's like a warning sign, almost.
Definitely. Be careful how you interpret things. Doesn't matter if it's religion, history, or even just what you hear on the news.
Be a critical thinker. I like it.
Always question the narratives.
Okay, so we've talked about a lot of darkness, violence, tough questions about responsibility. But chapter 4, it doesn't just end there. We've got Seth coming in, Adam and Eve's new son, like a little ray of hope.
You know, I was thinking about that. For Eve, Seth must have felt like such a gift.
Yeah, after losing Abel in such a horrific way.
To heal. And symbolically, too, a new beginning for humanity, a chance to, you know, get things right.
A do-over, but not really a clean slate. The past is still there.
Right, exactly. It's not like everything's just forgotten. Cain and Abel's story, it still hangs over everything.
It was more about carrying that weight forward, right?
Yeah, picking up the pieces, moving on, but carrying that weight.
And through Seth, humanity's story, it keeps going.
There's this little detail at the end of chapter 4 that always gets me. It says, "And to Seth, to him also there was born a son, and he called his name Enos. Then began men to call upon the name of the Lord."
Okay, I'm going to be honest, I don't get it. Weren't people already praying to God before that? What's so special about this part?
It's subtle, but some scholars think it's pointing to a shift. Like, before it was maybe more individual, you know, but now it's collective.
People coming together.
Yeah, turning towards God as a group. Maybe even the beginning of formal worship.
So after all that chaos with Cain and Abel, there's this sense of community emerging, finding strength in each other, maybe.
A reaffirmation of hope after all that darkness. And it kind of sets the stage for the rest of Genesis, right? This back and forth, this struggle in humanity's relationship with God.
What strikes me is, even though it's an ancient story, it still feels so relevant today. I mean, jealousy, rage, guilt, haven't we all felt those things at some point?
Totally. It's a testament to how powerful these stories are. They tap into something essential about being human.
Something timeless. That makes you think, these stories passed down for generations, maybe they're meant to teach us something.
Like how to navigate these complex emotions,
Yeah,
right?
and even make better choices.
It's like we're all part of this bigger narrative, this struggle between darkness and light.
Yeah.
And by looking at these ancient texts, maybe we can understand ourselves a little better.
And our place in the world.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've covered a lot, from the text itself to how it's been interpreted, but we're not done yet. In part 3, we're going to step outside the story, See how Cain and Abel show up in other places.
Art, literature, even psychology.
It's going to get really interesting.
Yeah.
All right, welcome back. So we've been really digging into this story of Cain and Abel, but now I kind of want to see how it's, how it's shown up in other places, like beyond the Bible itself.
Yeah, it's everywhere.
Really? Give me some examples.
Oh, art, literature, psychology, you name it. The themes are so universal, right? Sibling rivalry, guilt, consequences. It doesn't matter what time period or culture you're in, it still resonates.
Okay, I get that, but like, how about specifics? What about art? I can picture some, I don't know, intense Renaissance painting or something.
Oh, for sure. Renaissance painters, they were obsessed with biblical scenes. Cain and Abel, totally a favorite subject. You got paintings of the offerings, the murder, even Cain walking around with that mark on his forehead.
Heavy stuff.
But it's not just the old masters. Modern artists, sculptors, they're still grappling with these themes in their work.
So it's like this visual language, right? To explore these darker parts of the human experience.
Exactly. And you see it in literature, too. John Milton's Paradise Lost, for example. Cain and Abel are right there, representing this whole battle between good and evil.
Wow, so this isn't just Sunday school material. It's like woven into Western culture.
100%. And it's interesting how the interpretations change depending on who we're talking to. Theologically, there's been tons of debate about why God favored Abel's offering.
Was it just the thing itself, like the firstborn lamb versus some fruit? Or was it something more?
Yeah, like, was it about Abel's intention?
Yeah.
Was his heart in the right place?
So people were already having these arguments about faith and good deeds, like back then.
Oh, yeah. It gets to the core of, like, what does it mean to be righteous, to please God? Some say it's all about faith. Others say actions are what count.
Shows you there's never just one answer.
Nope. Layers of interpretation. It's what makes these ancient texts so interesting. They keep changing, evolving.
Okay, I never would have thought of this, but you mentioned psychology earlier. What's the connection there?
Well, I mean, obviously it's sibling rivalry 101, but psychologists have also used it to understand, like, deeper stuff. Guilt, shame, even violence.
Like that whole thing with Cain denying what he did. Am I my brother's keeper? Is that something we all do? Try to avoid taking responsibility.
It's a classic defense mechanism. Distance yourself from the consequences of your actions.
Especially if they're bad consequences.
Right. And that question, am I my brother's keeper, it's still relevant today. Like, what do we owe to each other? How far does that responsibility actually go?
Man, we've gone from ancient sacrifice to modern psychology. It's pretty wild how this one story just keeps branching out.
It's powerful stuff. Shows you how much these ancient stories still have to teach us about, well, about being human.
About the darkness inside us. Our potential for jealousy, for violence.
It's kind of a scary thought.
It is. But there's also that potential for redemption, for growth. Don't forget, after the tragedy, there's that new beginning with Seth.
It's like a reminder that life goes on, even after the worst things happen.
It does.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. The text, the interpretations, how it's impacted our culture. It's been quite a journey.
It has. And I think it leaves us with some big questions to think about, right? Like, how do we face that darkness inside ourselves? And how can we try to be, well, our brother's keeper in a world that feels increasingly divided?
Tough questions, but important ones. And maybe by looking at these stories, engaging with them, we can find some answers. Or at least get a little closer to understanding ourselves and the world around us.
Absolutely. So thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the story of Cain and Abel. It's been a pleasure exploring it with you. Until next time, keep diving deep.